All right. So last week, because of low attendance last week, we went a little bit off script. So um, everyone who was not here last week joining us this week, we haven't skipped any material. I mean, we skipped material. We went over some like TypeScript and some other cool stuff. But those were just kind of extra lessons planned for, weeks like last week. So you didn't miss anything. I still need to upload the videos so far. I've been running into some technical issues with that, so bear with me. But what I'm probably going to end up doing in the short term is uploading those videos to perhaps a GitHub repo so you can still download them, but YouTube is not cooperating with me. So until I figure that out, we may have to do something like that. Keep an eye out in the advanced web channel. But so for this week, I kind of want to try something a little different. I want to do two things at once, and this will be kind of a primer for state management, which we'll get into a little bit later, probably next week, maybe the week after, with React hooks in particular. But I want to touch on how to separate components and make them a little bit more clean in terms of components and controllers and what those are supposed to look like. And also we're going to be looking at the Material UI library so we can make UIs that look really nice right out the box without us having to mess with CSS. But also they have options available as far as CSS in order to customize the look of those components. So that's what we're going to try to do today. And to that end, I think we're actually probably maybe going to start a new UI for that, because what I'm thinking too is we looked at the Pokemon API last week. We're not going to be hitting it yet, but we're going to take some information out of it in order to spin up this UI, which will then play into a later lesson where we hook up this UI to an API to the Pokemon API, right? So that's what the goal is. And for now, we're just going to make it nice and static. Again, we're just going to take information, copy and paste it from the Pokemon API in order to make that happen. And we're more or less going to make like a Pokemon card using a few Material UI components and maybe making the site a little bit interactive with, it might be an introduction React hooks. We'll see how much time we have. So for now, I'm actually going to close this because it'll be easier, and I'll send you a link to this, which I believe is already in the channel, but I'll just post it again. So this is the Pokemon API. We're going to be playing with this a little bit because it's set up specifically for what we're using it for, education. So, so go ahead and make a new folder. I'm going to go ahead and post it. What week are we on? I'm going to make a folder for like week 3 or something. Actually, I'm just going to use the create React app script. So npx create React app. And we're going to name this, I'm going to name it Pokemon UI. And we're making this new one so that when we get into our project with hooking up the API, we're going to come back to this exact same project. So I wouldn't use, my first app or anything for this. So we'll just wait a little bit for that to spin up, but I'll go over the Pokemon API and what we're going to be using it for today. So the API is a REST API that will provide all the information on all the Pokemon that exist. And they actually keep this, they're still maintaining this, funny enough. But the beauty of this site, I think, is that it doesn't have course enabled, which is something we will talk about when we get into APIs. But what that means is if we wanted to, we can hit the Pokemon API directly from a UI. For security purposes, that's not normally allowed with almost any other website. It's got to be API to API. But Pokemon API lets us do that. Also, it's free. That's nice. Just don't hit them too many times. We don't need to set up an account to use it. So that's why I like using it. These are really hard to come by, funny enough. But and the documentation is actually nice and complete. So when we look at the documentation, I'm gonna look at the Pokemon endpoints. There's, well, actually, yeah. I think the main one I wanted to show you was on the Oh, yeah, it's right on the front page is what I wanted to do. So the main endpoint gets information about the specific Pokemon, and we can hit the endpoint directly on the site to see what it returns as well, which is pretty sick. So I'm just going to put 0 or 1, 0 Pokemon 0. I don't even know, probably not. But that will return, Bulbasaur based on their IDs. If you're familiar with Pokemon, each Pokemon has a number, and I only recognize the first 101. But there's like, I don't know how many of them there are now. There's like 700 or something absurd, but including a Chandelier Pokemon, if you want to look that one up. But it'll return all of its abilities, base experience, whatever that means. This is a game thing, I suppose. The forms it takes, if applicable, et cetera, et cetera. What I am specifically wanting to look at is the sprites. This is what we're going to use in the project today. And sprites, these are the images. So if I were to copy this URL and open a new tab, we can see just a little sprite that's used in the video games. And there's 10 of them, and it's just, back default. That these are the images that show up when you're playing the video game. And yeah, so this shows you the JSON of what will come back right on the web page. Of course, we can also use Postman. Let me open a tab that isn't covered by an NDA. And we can see what the request looks like in Postman. Again, that's for the API lesson, but that's why we're using this site. And this is done. So we can now CD into our Pokemon UI folder. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to delete a bunch of stuff that we don't need. We'll go into report web vitals. We don't need this. Get rid of it. Set up tests. We're not going to write tests. Well, I'm going to keep this here actually, and you can too if you want to play with tests. We are going to look at tests probably, maybe not for React testing library, but we'll see. Logo, we don't need this. Goodbye. Index.js. We can get rid of this web vitals line so that it doesn't crash, and this down here. And this, we'll keep this here for now. It's going to fail once we change this, but and we can get rid of everything inside the div and just replace it with hello and get rid of the logo. Did I go too fast for anyone there, or are we good at deleting stuff at this point? Nothing in the chat, hearing no voices. All right, so we'll go ahead and start this. npm start. So I'm just starting it to make sure I didn't forget anything, and it still will spin up. We are going to have to change the version of React that we're using because Material UI is not caught up yet. I didn't check since actually like 2 weeks ago, but it's probably safe to assume that they haven't migrated Material UI to use React 18 just yet. So we'll just downgrade React to 17 in the JSON. In the package JSON and re-download it in order to make it work. And also I confirmed that Bootstrap React still works with only 17, not 18, if you want to play with that. So we see the website is up and nothing's broken. Good news. So let's go to Material UI's website, which I will post, mui.com. And I think we already had an introduction to, oh, that was weird. We had an introduction to Material UI already, but just to go over it again real quick, it's a component library. So all of these, fancy buttons and outlined and text and chips. There's material icons, which is actually a separate package, but this is available. Oh, this might be integrated now. No, it's not. It's a separate package. But topography, we got all sorts of good stuff that we can use that already looks good right out the box. So you don't need a designer in order to make the website look good at all. It's pretty nice. And we'll demonstrate a couple of these components in particular for the Pokemon card thing that I want to build. We're going to use, where are you? There's a paper, which is in here somewhere. There you are. There's also card, which We could also use, there's some, it's got a paper background, this component here, but it's got some more stuff. Paper essentially is just a div that has a nice border to it. I'm in dark mode right now, but when we use it on our site, it's going to be a white background like this. And it's got a bunch of, excuse me, it's got a bunch of styling that's kind of brought forward to us and abstracted away from us, but we can also set an explicit style with regular old CSS if we want, which we will be doing. But that's the paper elements. Another one we're probably going to use is the name of it is escaping me. Well, we'll get there when we get there, but paper is what we're going to start with. So first we need to download it. And most of the time when you come across documentation like this, there's going to be getting started page is what most of them are called. That'll tell you how to download it and generally how it works. We're just worried about installation. And we could just do MPMI, you know, Material UI and everything, but it also has some other stuff for styling that it will also need. And Emotion React and Emotion Styled. I'm not entirely sure what Emotion React is, but I know Styled has custom fonts that aren't built into our browser. So we're going to want those. I mean, they're not required. You can use the regular, I think it defaults to Arial if we don't have this, but whatever their font is, in my opinion, it looks nicer and it's made to work with Material UI. So we'll just copy this whole line and download everything. So we got to kill this, paste it here. When we install these three things, this shouldn't take too terribly long, but when we install this, it's going to edit our package.json for us and add it to our dependencies here. In fact, while we're here, we could also get rid of Web Vitals because we're not using it. But you see it just added, you know, Emotion and Material UI. And we will need to bump this down to 17. I don't know what the latest stable 17 version is, but there's also a good chance it will just run. I think React made it backwards compatible fairly recently so that if you have React 17 modules, it'll still work. And it would be yelling at me by now if it didn't, so we may not need to do that. Yeah, and you can also see, I think I just saw that. Hello, it either flickered or it changed to the font. I'm not entirely sure, but now that we have that on board, we can go to, yeah, we can go to app.js. I actually want to make our folders controller and components. So new folder, controllers. And components. Is everyone with me so far? I went kind of fast on that, on everything I just did.
How did you install the paper again?
So paper is actually going to be installed. I can't scroll up right now, of course not. Cleared it. Crap. I went to this documentation. I'll copy and paste this in the channel for you. All right, so that command I just posted in the Slack channel, that's what this is. And that'll get you paper. That'll get you literally all these components except for icons. Icons is a separate, where is it? But wherever it is, icons is a separate library. And they do that because icons are it's kind of a large download. So it doesn't make sense to package that with Material UI, but that's how you'll get it. So we have our components and controllers, folders, and the point of that is components. If you can help it, components should, and this is a design pattern, it's not required, but it's one that I recently started with, and I think it makes my code a lot cleaner. But there's the state of a component and there's the actual component itself that renders to the screen. And the controller, its job should be to manage state. If you've got any logic of any kind, a filter or a a web call or something like that, it should live in the controller. And the component should just be a dumb component. It should just take in whatever information the controller gives it and display it. And it's pretty much static. It's based on its props. It will only change if you give it different props, but given the same props, it will have the same result. Those are called side effects. So I'm getting a spam call right now. Turn my phone off. But those are called side effects. Side effects being anything that could do something different every time a component is called. So that'll be like an API call. That's a side effect. And what I'm talking about also is pure functions. And it's kind of what a component is. A pure function is, again, a function without side effects. Given the exact same inputs, it'll always give the exact same outputs. And we do that because, again, the code is cleaner when we do that, but also makes it easier to test. Because if you've got all of your logic and the actual UI part of the component in one place, then you have to write tests for both the logic and the controller at the same time, which is a gigantic pain in the butt. So you can separate duties that way. And again, it makes your, it makes your components reusable as well, because maybe you want to use the exact same component, just everything about it, you want to use it, but it's going to be fed different information. And you would provide a separate controller for that, potentially. It depends on, what it is that you're doing, but for the most part, it'll make the component reusable. So we're going to make the component first, and we'll name that Pokemon card.jsx. And we're going to change this later, and let's go ahead and make an actual component of some kind first. So const Pokemon card equals function return, and we'll just have it return, div hello world or Pokemon card or something like that, whatever. And export the Pokemon card so that we can then import it to app.js. And we'll import it to app.js for now. You should import the controller, and the controller will actually reference the Pokemon card later. But for now, just while we're building it, we're going to have it in app.js. So imports Pokemon card from, and it should autofill for you, which is nice. And we will put Pokemon card here. So when I run the app again and refresh the page, we should see the words Pokemon card. And the next thing we're going to do is get that paper function import, or that paper component imported, and start playing around with the style in order to make it more of a card. Because like I said, it behaves exactly like a div. It's just got like a border and a background. Otherwise, there's really no difference with it. And as such, when you have a div, and if you put a background on it so you can actually see the div, then it's going to show up as a single line at the very top of the viewport, because the div will fill its entire row. And typically it's only as tall as whatever is inside of it. So in this case, the word Pokemon card, we're going to see a border around it that's the exact same height as this text, but it's going to be as wide as the viewport. So let's go back to Pokemon card. There are two ways to import from a library like Material UI or any library that has multiple functions. And it doesn't really matter which one you use. It's more of a preference. But imports paper from at MUI material. So this will import the paper component, but this is another way to do it as well. Imports paper from at material UI / paper. Either way works. In the past, what this would do, because we're destructuring the entire Material UI library and picking out paper. So what this did in the past, to my knowledge, it no longer does this because they've updated Webpack. It would literally import the entire library, and then it would just pick out paper, ignore the rest. And for memory purposes, that's not good if we're just importing one thing from the whole library, and it's a big library too. But in this way, we were just importing the paper component directly from the folder that it lives in. So we weren't worried about this entire library. We just wanted to look at paper. But now Webpack does, it's got a little bit better tree shaking is what that's called. So it will see this line, and when it transpiles into vanilla.js, so it can run in our browser, it will actually change this import style to this import style automatically. So we don't have to worry about which one we're using. I personally like this one because if I'm using multiple things from the same library, then I can just comma, card, comma, button, etc., instead of having separate lines for each import. But again, that's just me. If you like the other way better, then more power to you, do it. So it's a drop-in replacement for div. And because Webpack has, and yeah, so we see this line under here now, and we can kind of sort of make out the beveled border on the right side and the left side. It's filling out the entire row. So we could do some stuff about that to make this more of a card. So the easiest way is to give it an inline style. So I don't remember if we went over this already, but there are two ways to supply style to any element in React. There's inline style, which is, I mean, it's kind of what I do more. And then there's also, you can use regular old CSS if you want. And it kind of depends. If you got a style that you're really only ever going to use once, it may make more sense to just have a inline style. But if you're finding yourself using the same style object like 100 times, then it would make more sense to put it in a CSS, especially if you have one page that's got a crap load of different classes like this, then it makes more sense to put it here and it makes your code a little cleaner. But again, that's more of a preference thing. Some people are opinionated about that. I'm not, I don't care. But yeah. So in order to give it style, inline style, we have the style prop, and we have to use two sets of brackets. You can see the outer, on mine at least, is highlighted in red and the inner is white. That's because the outer is telling it that there is JavaScript that is happening inside of the brackets. In this case, it's just an object literal, but this is JavaScript. So you can't do this because it yells at you. JSX attributes must be assigned a non-empty expression, and there's nothing in here. So width, and I'm just gonna kind of play with this a little bit, but for now we'll set it to 300 pixels, something like that. When we go back to our page, we'll see that this has shrunk. And when you're also playing with style, that's another thing. You can edit the style directly in Chrome because CSS is the bane of my existence. I still have to look stuff up every time I play with it. Like what's the difference between margin and padding, and you know how to center it on the page and all that fun stuff. So instead of playing with the code, waiting for this to refresh, going back and forth, I got two monitors here. So this is only a problem with the one where I have to switch between the apps. You can right click, inspect. By the way, let me know if I'm going too fast. But I right clicked directly on the paper and I've got it highlighted here. So I could look at, all right, the width 300 pixels that I put in here is already in here. And this also went to a mobile view because the app I work on at work is mobile. So that's just kind of how I work. But you can turn certain parts of the element style off because maybe you put in a piece of style that doesn't actually do anything for whatever reason. You can test that in here and have a little bit less code. But what else do I want to do? I want to give it a height of 400 pixels. That looks good to me. And again, I can turn this on and off. I kind of want this centered on the page. The thing about centering is that I'd have to do that in the div above instead of this, just because of how that works. So I could do, if I wanted, and this is generally not great because it'll not play nice with other components on the page, but I can give it a position of absolute if I want. And then do left 0 pix and right 0 pix, I think. No, that doesn't. Oh, auto. I want auto. Yeah, that's better. That didn't do it either. Like I said, I'm not good at CSS, but instead of going in the code and constantly refreshing the page, you could play with it directly here. I'm actually just going to go ahead and get rid of these, but I'm going to keep the height of 400 pixels. Now there's another thing about inline style that you need to know. Because it's in the form of a JavaScript JSON object, it's a little different. Let's see if I have an example here. So I've got minimum height, min dash height. If I wanted a minimum height for whatever reason, I can copy this over into this object, but it's not going to like that for reasons because a dash is not something that you can just put in JSON as a key. I mean, you can if you made this a quote, and it might still yell at me, but generally when you're using inline style, it prefers that you use camel case like this. So snake case is what CSS is normally in, and that's what this is, that's snake case. Camel case is the first word in a variable name is lowercase min, and the second word is uppercase height. And every other word is uppercase, just like that. So that's called camel case. So it looked like it was actually fine when I put the snake case in quotes, but I don't know if that would have worked, but excuse me, but it's better to just use the camel case when you're using inline style. Are there any questions on that? Did I go over anything too quickly?
Can you show your app.js real quick? I think I have an error in mine.
What's the issue?
The app.js.
Oh, app.js, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
All right, everything good? I'll take that as a yes. All right. I've got the Zoom stuff in the way here, so I moved this down. Anyway, so we got the Pokemon card again, and I'm going to add that height of what did I put it as 400 pixels to solidify that. What else? So I also don't like how it's just running up like right up on the edge of the page here. So I can give it a margin if I want in order to separate it a little bit and to separate it from any other components I add to the screen, like a second Pokemon card. So I will add margin. It might be padding. I think margin's on the outside. Padding is on the inside. So margin, and I think 10 pixels will do it. So we can barely see it, but we can see that it's now not all up on the corner of the screen. So that's nice. And speaking of, I'm gonna make the background of this a little darker so you can actually see it because the white on white isn't working for me here. So I'm gonna give it a background of, and there are some just word colors that you can use. You could use red or blue. Light gray, I think, is an acceptable one. Either that or what's it called? It starts with a percent. It's escaping me. I'll remember it after class. But anyway, we made the background a little bit darker just so we can see that we've got some space here. And we also see that the Pokemon card is like right up on the top here. I don't like that. So we can, again, edit it in Chrome. Yeah, edit it in Chrome until we figure out, what we want the padding on the inside to be. So padding, and I'm probably going to give it 10 pixels again to get that Pokemon card down a little bit. But we also saw, and you just barely saw it, that when you do that, it'll actually increase the size of the child view. Yeah, I'm going to say child view, but and I can turn this on and off to show you. Look at that. It messes with the size. So that's something to keep in mind as well with CSS, and that's kind of a pain. And it also kind of messes with margin as well. Not really, but padding especially can kind of screw with you a little bit, because if I were to put a second component to the right of this, then that padding may pose an issue. I actually don't think it will in this case, but it can. But I'm gonna add a second Pokemon card just to see what happens. So it added down here, and because I edited the CSS just in Chrome, it's not carrying over. So what did I set that to? Padding 10 pixels. I'll just put that in this here. MPX. Cool, so now they both look the same. And maybe I want to have the cards show up side to side instead of up and down, because again, these are divs. So a div will inherently operate in a row, and any additional divs you add will push it down. And paper is a div. You can't really make it a span, which would kind of solve this problem. So I could do one of two things. I could wrap this in a span, or I can adjust the containing div, which this is the app div. So I don't want to do that, but that's a good use of the controller probably, but I'm just going to do inline here. So I'm going to wrap this in a span. And that probably won't do it. Or I may need to, you know what, we'll ignore that for now. What the other solution is to adjust the style of the containing element in order to force these next to each other. I just don't want to mess with app and mess with the style here to make them show up next to each other. So for now, you know what, that doesn't matter. But we're going to start giving this some props. And then afterwards, we're going to give it a controller. So the first one will be the title or the name of the Pokemon. So we'll just give it a prop of name. And I almost did some TypeScript stuff and gave this a type, but we're not doing that right now. So we're just going to give it name. And we'll adjust that in app.js. Name equals Bulbasaur and name equals, I don't know, Ivysaur. All right, looking good so far. And I'm actually going to close this, push it to the side so we can work on the code at the same time. There we go. All right. And then below it, I would probably want the sprite right here. And those sprites are small images because those are the ones that are meant for the video games, which, oh, I just learned something. So this still wouldn't work because, and this is something that Nico just posted, which I wasn't aware of. I wrapped it in a span, but it didn't do the thing. But apparently you can set what component that paper uses. Under the hood, when you don't give it anything, it's a div, but you can give it the component prop and make it, is it? Yeah, it's a string. And you can make it a span. Again, that's, ooh, that is not what I wanted to see. Not sure what's
Nice
going on
try.
there. Yeah, it was worth a shot, but they're next to each other, so that's something.
Yeah, maybe a flex box or something, but yeah.
Yeah, it's ignoring height and width for some reason. Actually, I want to see what the style looks like when I do that. Gross.
Yeah, you would need to give it an inline block or something to.
Yeah. So there's not really an element style that it's telling me. Yeah, there's the width and the height. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. Whatever.
Yeah, but the inline elements won't take the width or a height. So
Weird.
yeah.
I hate CSS anyway. So yeah, we'll just have it working up and down. That's fine. Again, you can force them next to each other by adjusting the style of, oh God, adjusting the style of the containing div component. But we'll get to that later. So anyway, there was that one sprite that we have right here, and this is as big as the image is. Again, this is an image that shows up when you're playing on a handheld game. I think these images are from, I don't know, Fire Red or something. I'm not really sure, but anyway, these are small images, so this isn't gonna look quite right. We can make the images bigger, but we're gonna, expose all the pixels because these are not SVGs as far as I know. No, I think they're like PNGs. So it's gonna look like crap, but we're gonna do it anyway. So right below the name, we're gonna add the sprite. So in this case, we can give it a sprite link because we don't actually need to do anything fancy with images because it's already built into the browser. Excuse me. So sprite, and we'll just name it sprite actually. So sprite equals, and this is a link, and I'll just feed them both the same image for now. It doesn't really matter. This is something that we're gonna make a little bit more dynamic in another lesson, so that it actually calls. So that it actually calls the Pokemon API and it can load this data. But we gave it the sprite and we just need to display it. So we would use the image tag img. There's also like icon button or something like that, and disable the button to make it look kind of neat. But for now, we're just going to use image SRS or SRC rather equals sprite. Close the tag, and this alt. Now I'm not going to do anything with alt. And that showed up next to Bulbasaur, which isn't what we wanted. So we can use divs to force them below each other. So I'm going to wrap name in a div. And I could probably also do the same thing with image because images are in line. But anything below it, I could also make a div either. Either way, it doesn't matter, but it's already centered because we have the center CSS going on in app.css. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, text align center. So that's a problem, I think, because if we were to take this away, then it would mess with the card. There's another text align somewhere. Nope, it just didn't reload right away. So yeah, when I took that away, it pushed everything to the left. So I don't like that. I'd rather have that style live in here. So I'm going to add that to text align center to get everything centered up again. Because if I were to take this card and put it into another div that doesn't have that style, then it would screw up our look. So that's why I did that. And I also want the image to be a little bit bigger. Again, it's going to look pixelated and it's going to look like crap, but I want this to look like more like an actual trading card. So we're going to do width. And I think we could do the style tag in here too, but the image tag already has width and height props that we can use. So, and I think sizes. Let's see, 60 px. Does that work? I don't know what sizes is. So we'll just use width and height and make them the same. So width equals, we'll play with 60 for now, and height equals 60. That's smaller, so that's not what I wanted. Let's do 100. Let's do 300. Yeah, that works. And I'll actually make the height a little bit lower because it's actually doing us, you know what, 200 pixels. We'll just leave it at that because I still want more space down here. 200 px. All right, that good enough. And then I can add a style like a background color in order to make this make it obvious where the image is. And because I wanted to make not make it a box but a rectangle, I can't quite do that with this because that'll alter the image as well. So I can wrap this in a div or span, doesn't matter, here, and adjust the size of the div itself. So that's what I'll do. Style equals background. We'll make it a nice offensive color so I can actually see where it is. Actually, that looks good to me, I think. So I'll just make it a background gray so that it's differentiated on the card. And also, I don't like how it's pushing up against the word Bulbasaur, so we can adjust the style and div above here as well. Style, and I can do margin bottom of 10 pixels. Cool. So there's something I forgot about. There's something called typography in Material UI that allows us to use use different components like headers and different kinds of headers. And we'll go to the docs to look at that. And it also uses that font that we downloaded. And I think it looks better because I think right now, I'm pretty sure this is Arial. I'm not really sure. It might be different on your browser, but where is it? Typography. There it is. But typography will take in whatever style it is that you're using. And you want to use typography. It feels like it doesn't do that much. You could just do the same exact thing with, the style prop in CSS. But the reason you would want to use typography with Material UI specifically is that these docs are showing up in dark mode for me right now. And if you want your app to be able to transition between light mode and dark mode, by default, it's in light mode, then your text is going to be all screwed up. Because right now, when I put in the typography tag, this text is going to show up as black. And when I change it to dark mode, it'll show up as like an off-white color. So you want to use typography for the most part wherever you have text showing up. So we'll import typography. And typography also acts like a div under the hood if you don't give it the alternate component. So we can just do drop-in replacement for our div. We could keep the same style and everything. And we'll see that I don't know if it updated. It's honestly hard to tell the difference, but this is probably using the font the typography sets to. So I'm actually gonna undo that change and just keep your eyes on Bulbasaur. Yeah, it marginally different fonts, but in any case, if you want to change your app to dark mode, then typography is going to automatically adjust the style for you. And what's this that was posted? Oh, cool. So Richa just posted, there's the box element inside of Material UI that takes care of that side-by-side problem for us, among other things. So we can look at that real quick. I could probably just put the box in app.js underneath the div, because again, I don't want to mess with the div because this is where the actual app is rendering, but I'll just copy what Richa posted and paste it. And of course, we need to import box and paper. So import box paper. By the way, I copied this from the chat from Richa. So from Material UI. And there we go. So those are side by side, and I'll copy my Pokemon cards inside that. Cool. And we'll just give this one more. All right, so that still looks kind of wonky to me. I don't know if it adjusted the height, but cool. Now they're side by side. Thank you, Richa. I think I'm going to get rid of width. So that's probably why they. No. All right, whatever. I don't care. I'll get rid of width and height because this will automatically resize to fit whatever it's containing. So we don't need width and height. I don't know what this is. So I'm going to comment it out to see if it breaks. Yeah, I have no idea what this is. This looks like a style that dynamically changes for each element that's in there. I'm not really sure what that was. But anyway, we have them side by side now and they don't look weird. So that's good news. And we're not using paper. So we can get rid of that. You saw that it was syntax highlighting saying that paper is not used. So we can just get rid of that because otherwise it's a useless import. Webpack will take care of that for us. But still better to just get rid of it. I'll just give this an alternate so this stops highlighting as well. So that's it. The alternate is if it can't load the image, then it'll show the message in its place. And I can't really force that example. I probably could by changing this and see what happens. Yeah, so it'll show up bad icon, Pokemon icon. And to that end, I see that Pokemon icon, when this is showing up, the div is actually shorter. So I'm going to adopt this style here, or rather the 200 style, so that it doesn't look like that when an image can't load. 200 px, right, 200 px, and I did an equal sign instead of a colon. That's why it's mad. There we go. Ugh. Let's do with 100% instead. That's better. All right, so now we got that edge case figured out. So now I would fill out the rest of this, but I just looked at the clock. So now we're gonna talk about controllers. So a controller is something that has logic in them if you have any logic. If you don't, then you can get away with just using the bare component. But this is a dumb component. There is no logic that is working in here. When we start talking to our APIs, then we might have logic in here to, you know, set state and do whatever it is we're going to do. But for now, we don't want that. Or rather, not for now. We don't ever want that in components if we can help it. If there's like one line of logic and maybe it's not a side effect, it still depends on the props, then you can go ahead and put logic here, but you don't want it to fill out to the point where you should just have a controller. So we're going to make a Pokemon card controller. Controller.jsx. And the naming convention with controllers and components, the components is just, you know, whatever the name of your component is, and Pokemon card controller. You want the word controller in there, even though it's in the controllers folder, it'll help differentiate because it's not going to be as obvious when you have both of the tabs open at the same time. So const Pokemon card controller equals return, and for now we'll just give it a div, export default Pokemon card controller. No, what? I have no idea what that is, but that's not right. And in our app.jsx, we're no longer going to import the component, we're going to import the controller. So, and we can name it whatever we want when we do import. So import Pokemon card controller autofill. And if I wanted, I can just have this named Pokemon card instead of controller in here if I wanted. But that might cause problems. I'm going to see what happens. But the Pokemon card controller will generally have the same props as Pokemon card, unless there's something that is derived. That if I'm giving app.js something like maybe a link to get the information from the Pokemon, where is it? From the Pokemon API, then these props wouldn't happen. It would just get it from the website, which we'll do later. But for now, these will be the exact same props because they will eventually get passed down to the Pokemon card component. And I need to import Pokemon card from component/Pokemon card. And this is what most of your controllers are gonna look like. There's gonna be logic up here. This is where state's gonna live once we start talking about state. And its return is literally just gonna be the component with whatever props we're gonna give it. In this case, we could just pass down name and sprite as they are. Name and sprite. So that when it's passed down from app, which we have the name and the sprite here, it's going to get passed down to the controller and then finally to the card. And this seems like useless right now, but once we get the logic in here and you see the separation, it's going to be kind of nice. So yeah, that's a little bit of boilerplate that we have to deal with, but it'll be worth it. So what I think I'm going to do in order to demonstrate this better is I'm going to have a button that I'm going to import from Material UI that's going to be down here. And when I click it, a thing is going to happen. And this will also be a good introduction to use state. We'll talk more about use state in a future lesson, as well as things like use reducer, use effect. But for now, we're going to introduce use state in a very simple manner. When we talk about state next, we're going to talk about class components, so you can see what's happening under the hood with these hooks, but we're not going to worry about that now. So I'm going to import a button from material, and we're going to put it down here, button. And if I'm remembering correctly, this is actually not self-closing. There we go. And I want this to be a contained component. So I'll bring up the docs and show you what I mean by that. So by default, the button, of course, there's 18 of them. There we go. So by default, the button is, it looks like this guy, which we could see here. And I'm not a big fan of that personally. I want it to be contained or perhaps outlined. Outline looks cool. And there we go. So the great thing about these docs is that it shows you, the components actually rendered on screen and then the code to get them. So that's nice. I can just copy this. I like the outlined button, so I'm gonna copy this over. And change this to click me. There we go. So when I click this, my goal is to have like a counter for how many times I clicked the button. So again, dumb component. So no state's going to be living in here. We're just going to have another typography element down here, component rather. And in here's going to be another variable click counts. And by default, I want that to be set to 0. So we have 0. Every time this clicks, this is going to increment. Now, that logic needs to be handled inside the controller because that is logic and state that's happening. So we need to find a way to have this button and its click event communicated to the controller that contains it so it can do whatever it's going to do to increment that number. Let's import the use state tag. Again, this is an intro. I'm not going to go in depth with this, but it's pretty simple. Import use state from lowercase React. And we'll set the initial state here, const, and use state's kind of weird because it returns an array of 2 items. The first item will be the actual variable that contains whatever information, and then there will be a setter. So you're getting a getter and a setter from use state, and that's in an array. Why? I don't know, but that's what we're going to go with. Probably so you can name it whatever you want, actually. That's probably why. But the first item, like I said, is the getter. So we're going to do click counts. And the second one will be set click counts. And we'll have a starting value of 0. So when you invoke use state, whatever's on the inside of here is going to be its initial value. So when I console log click count, console.log click count, we'll see it. We should see it I have a filter. We do see it console logging 0, but we'll see it console log multiple times. We only have the 2 components, but it's console logging 1, 2. It's console logging twice for both components for whatever reason. The reason for that is re-renders. So all of this code up here, well, use state's kind of weird with this, and all the hooks are weird with this, but anytime this component re-renders, so whenever something changes on the screen or when it gets a different name or a different sprite, it'll trigger a re-render. And that can happen any number of times, just as much as React decides. And we'll go into why later when we do talk about use state and class components and whatnot, but that's kind of what's happening. So you can't do any logic down here because it's going to do it like 80 times. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't because it's expensive and not very efficient. But anyway, that's why you saw the console log happen like a bunch of times. But we do know that click count right now has a state of 0. So we'll pass that down to the Pokemon card, which already has its prop. So click count equals click count. And we can see that in action when we change this. So I'll change that to a 10 and we should see on screen that it's getting passed down. Now, in order to set it, we can either create a function that will increment that count every time it's invoked, or we can just pass down set click count. I personally don't like to give getters directly to variables for whatever reason, because maybe, again, we want our Pokemon card to be as reusable as possible, whether or not we plan to, because, you know, plans will change. If you make a component, you think you're never going to use it again, but you might use it elsewhere, and you want different logic attached to it. So for that reason, I would rather make a function such as on click or something like that. So const on click equals, and this will be a function, and we're going to set this to set click count to whatever the value is +1. So set click count +1. And we could pass this function down to Pokemon card. So the on click could be different if we have different logic that we want to employ with it. So we'll give it on click. And I believe that prop is actually the same for the button. So on click, yep. And just give it that function. So now when we are rendering to the screen, Pokemon card controller will create the, and I didn't pass it here yet, but it'll create the component and it'll give it the function that it should call when you click this button. When you do click the button, it'll call on click. It's the same exact function passed by reference, I believe, to this function here. It'll set the click count to previous value +1. And it'll trigger a re-render because use state, whenever this changes, it will tell React to refresh the page. And because the values are different. So on click equals on click. So now when I press this button, it is incrementing, and these states are separate from each other because they live in each individual Pokemon card controller. So did all of that just make sense? Do we know what happened here and why it's working? I am seeing nothing in the chat and I'm hearing no voices. So yeah, this is a nice, simple example of use state, and we're going to get more in depth. But first, before we talk about use state, use effect, use anything else, those are collectively called hooks. We are going to make a class component, and it's the old way. It's archaic. It's not the way that new React apps are built anymore, but it's still important to go over class components because all of what use state is actually doing is abstracted away from us. And same thing, especially with use effect. Use effect is something that runs either on page load. You can have it return another function for when the page is dismounted, or when a component rather is dismounted, and some other stuff. But the problem with use effect, while it's super useful and I love it using it, it's great, it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you know what a class component looks like and how it's all working under the hood, because we have to write all the functionality that use effect is doing on its own ourselves. So once we write that, you'll have a better understanding of it. But that's the intro to use state. And this is why we want to separate controllers and components, because again, we may have different logic that we want to attach to these dumb components later on. maybe the click button, and this is especially true for components like maybe a modal. A modal is a little window that shows up on the web page. It's not a pop-up technically, but it behaves kind of like one. But you may want to make a modal that will respond to different events. So you would want to give it different functions. So on click, it'll do a different thing. And again, maybe you will never reuse the component, but the fact that it's reusable may save you a lot of work later on, which is why we want to make these nice and dumb, because there's no logic that's going on in here. It's not filtering anything. It's doing absolutely nothing except displaying the information that we are giving it. And on the upper level, when we're an app, we only have to give it right now. We only have to give it the name and the sprite, and the click count and the function and everything that all happens inside of controller. So essentially, once we're done with this component, and for a while we may not touch it, we can use this component wherever we want, and we only have to give it two things. And later on, we're going to strip this down to only take one thing, an ID, because we're going to write something that can reach out to, where is it again? The Pokemon API, and grab all the information it needs. And that will greatly expand how much code is in here, and it will make it a lot more obvious why Pokemon card and the controller should remain separate, because it'll make for a lot cleaner code. Again, we could have all that logic live inside of Pokemon card, but and I mean, if you're just giving it an ID and you know that's how Pokemon card will always be used, that's fine. But this, in my opinion, is a lot cleaner. But this is a pattern. This isn't required. Great thing about React is that it's not opinionated. So if a new pattern comes out, then they don't have to make a change to React in order to employ it, in order for you to be able to take advantage of it. So that is pretty much all I wanted to go over today with use state and everything. Is there anything else that someone wants to see? Maybe another component that you'd like a demo of? I'm probably going to demo some more of the controls. If no one has any other ideas. All right, so we're going to demo some more controls then. So the radio button. So a regular old button just has really one, oh, where is it? There it is. This button only really has one thing attached to it, whereas something like a text box has a couple of things. And I'm getting a little ahead with state and everything, but we're going to go ahead and do this anyway. And we're actually going to do this inside of Pokemon controller to save some time with prop drilling. So I'll just put it on top of Pokemon card. And when we revisit this little project, this will become useful for us. But I want to put in a text box. Now, text boxes are kind of weird with state. But the way they do things, it's weird, but it makes sense once you do it a couple times and see the need for it. So generally in a vanilla HTML website, text fields have their own state. Whatever you type in them, they'll retain it themselves. And when you want to access it using JavaScript, you have to ask the text field itself, hey, what text did the user type in you? Whereas with React and React hooks, we don't want the text field to have state, mostly because the way React works with the virtual DOM, these components will basically live and die like a million times while a user's on the website because of the re-render process. It's, I mean, if it's a very inefficiently built website, a text field could be re-rendered, and that means the old one is destroyed and a new one is created every single time the app updates. React found a way to make that a lot more efficient using the virtual DOM, so that if the virtual DOM version of it changes, then it'll change the real DOM version. But text fields in particular, every time you have a keystroke, it'll reload it. So the state will actually be lost. And I'm actually going to show you a really weird bug they may have fixed. I'm pretty certain they didn't. We'll see what happens. But I will type in something, it'll re-render it. and it'll lose that previous state. It's the weirdest thing in the world, but then I'll show you how to fix it and what you're supposed to do using React hooks. So we'll just take one of these. I'll take the outlined one. Come on. There we go. And I'll just paste it above the Pokemon card. I'm not gonna be prop drilling here. And we can get rid of ID and label. I don't care about label. And of course, we have to import text field from Material UI. And also, this isn't necessarily a problem with like a vanilla HTML text field, which would be input. It is because input has its own state. Text field generally doesn't. So right now, I think when I type in this, it's going to be fine. But once I attach state to it, it's going to do something weird. So we're going to create a new state const. And also, I'm going to whiten the page because this looks bad. There we go. Const text and set text equals use state. And use state, I don't know if I mentioned this, can take in literally anything as a starting value. And on a not great end, it can take anything as, and by anything, I mean type. It can take any type, but you can also set it to any type. This does not enforce that this always has to be a string. So that's something you have to be careful of. If I set text to 0, it could do some screwy stuff on the website if, well, not with text field, but with other pieces of state. So you got to be careful about that. And we'll just set text to, was it value? Yeah. Value equals text. I'll set the initial value so I could see. All right. So right now we don't have the setter. We only have the getter attached to this text box. If I do a backspace, it's not going to do anything. If I type in any more stuff, it will continue to not do anything. I am typing in here and it is firing off an event, but it's being re-rendered. So whatever I'm typing in here immediately gets destroyed. It'll create the new text field and it'll take whatever the value of text is, which is testing. So previously when I did this, I would actually see what it is that I was typing in here. And you can see while I'm typing, the cursor is actually not flashing. So stuff's happening, but it's re-rendering so quickly that you can't see the numbers that I'm typing. In the past, I was able to actually see what I was typing, but it would immediately disappear. So that is kind of a compliment to React that it reloads that quickly now. But anyway, so if I wanted the text field to actually update, I would need to do on, I think it's on change. Yeah, on change. And text field is also weird. I can't just give it set text. It's not going to know what to do with that. Because what it's actually giving it on change is, and you see it stringified as object. So it is giving it an object. And I'll make another function real quick to show you what that looks like. But it's using I don't know if it's the vanilla HTML event object or if it's slightly different, but I'm going to create const on text change equals, excuse me, event. And I'll console log the event so we can see what that looks like. And I'll replace set text with on text change. So now I can console log. And whenever I'm typing in here, we see the event and it looks like it's a synthetic base event. So I don't know, but it's an event object. So we need to grab whatever the changed value is out of this event object. And I can tell you now that lives under target value. So the first time I typed in there, it didn't really do anything, but where did it go? Yeah, so we have the event object. We need to grab target.value in order to set text to it. So that's kind of the weird thing with text inputs and also the other controls, such as the radio button and select and some of the other ones. They also have an event object that is passed, Excuse me. They also have an event object that's slightly different that is passed. For the most part, you can rely on event.target.value, but sometimes that might change and you need to probably console log and see what's going on in there. I think in particular, where is it? It's either radio button, maybe checkbox. I think checkbox, you have to go for event.target.checked, and it's going to be a Boolean. So that there's going to be minor differences between the components that you have to be aware of. But yeah, you can console log the event and see what it's spitting out so you can target your code for it. But we're going to go ahead and set text to event.target.value. So now when I go back to the page, I can start typing stuff and it's firing off the event. It's setting text, it's triggering a re-render, and it's putting that piece of text inside of our text box. So now it's working. And again, it might seem kind of weird because when you use the regular input tag in HTML, it stores its own state, but text field doesn't. You have to tell it exactly what the value is and what to do when the value changes. But otherwise, text field, it's a dumb component. It only displays what it's given. And it has events that allow it to fire off, not fire off, but tell its controller, which in this case, our Pokemon card controller is kind of acting like its controller here. But it has to be told what to display. And again, that may seem weird, but that's actually awesome because if you have, like maybe you want to make a custom component, and I believe one exists already, you could just give it a tag, you know, hidden, or no, text hidden or something like that, read the docs. But you can have it type in a password, like a password field that typically only shows stars, but it will have the actual password that was typed in the text object. In fact, I kind of want to give that a shot. So I will. So if I want to type something in here, that might be a password. And I'll use the console to show what the actual password is and what it's displaying here. So value will equal, and this will also get kind of weird because on change, it's going to take whatever the value is that's shown and publish it to on change at the same time. So all those asterisks that I replaced it with is going to end up on the event with whatever other character I typed as it goes with the way I'm about to do this. But in any case, so text.split. So when you do text.split, it'll break all of the characters into separate arrays. And then I'll use a map function to replace them with the asterisks. So once it reloads, it's probably going to be fine. That didn't quite work the way I thought it would. Hang on. Oh, and dot join. I need to, because it's an array of these things. So dot join, and I'm not going to give it anything, so it just joins it into a word again. So when I type anything in here, what's going on? Maybe I do need to give it empty string. There we go. So now I'm typing a bunch of numbers, but it's showing up as asterisks. But the problem here that we have to solve now is when I console log event.target.value, it's going to show exactly what I typed, but it's going to show the asterisks is before it. So what I could do in order to solve that problem is, well, for one, I could look at what event.target is. There may be something inside of it that I can use that shows maybe the last character that was typed. Did it? Oh. Let's try that again. That might be something. I'm actually not sure if that's in here. I've never done this before. But it might show the last character typed. If it doesn't, which it doesn't look like it does, then I can extract the last character out of event.target.value without the asterisks and then add that to text instead. So I can get the previous text const text equals for const new text equals text plus, and then I want to filter out the asterisks that already exist. Event.target.value dot split 0. So, or rather, dot last. There's a way to do this quickly, but yeah. Password typed, and I'll set it to event.target.value.split. You know what? I'm going to do dot reverse. This is hacky as all hell, but reverse. So it reverses the array and it gets the first element. There we go. That's the laziest possible way to do it. But anyway, and I'll console log new text so we could see what that looks like. But anyway, doing stuff like this, again, this isn't something I expect you to remember how to do, or even something I recommend at all, because this doesn't account for going in the center of the text and typing stuff here. But yeah, exactly. And if I completely erase the text field, that'll also cause an issue. But in general, and I'll just get rid of this. When I type a password in here and I don't want it to show 1, 2, 3, 4, I see that the value of text is showing the real value, but our text field is replacing all of that with asterisks. So that's a really poor way to make a password field, but that was to demonstrate why the text field has to take in a value as well as a setter. It does not contain the state on its own. You have to tell it what it is and what to do when it changes. So that's why they do that. For the most part, all you really do is what was originally here. In fact, we're just going to get rid of this and set state to event.target.value and replace this with just text. There we go. But this is generally mostly, almost all the time, is how you're going to use this. But that was just to demonstrate why they separate those things and why no component should ever house its own state, because there may be custom stuff you want to do with them. Are there any questions about what just happened? Again, I don't ever recommend making a text field that does that. I would probably find a component or rather a prop that already does that, because I do actually know one exists. Yeah, password.
Type password. Yep.
Right there.
Text field type password, it should auto convert it to dots.
Yep. So what I just did was kind of what's going on under the hood with text field when you tell it it's a password type field. But again, like if that functionality doesn't exist, or functionality that you want, that's generally how you would make it happen. But in that case, I probably would make it its own separate component, a component that houses the standard text field and returns it, but has the value altered like that so that it doesn't show the real value, but it still houses it. But yeah, so that's a little more than what I wanted to go over today. We talked about Material UI, how to use some of the components. We only really used a few of them, but hopefully that was a good primer. I would look through this doc and just find all the stuff that you can use. There's rating, so you don't have to make your own rating components. There's checkboxes, and there's even fancier stuff, such as there's a progress bar that looks really nice. That's customizable. You can change the color, and you can change the color on most of the stuff like we did with paper. And accordions. So this is pretty neat. Stuff like that. And yeah, so there's all sorts of stuff. It would be impossible for me to go over each and every one of these. That would be a class in its own, but these docs are really, really good. And also I would say you should look up Bootstrap React as well. Again, you may have to downgrade React to 17. React itself is backwards compatible now. That just released like maybe a week ago. So you may not have to do that. But React Bootstrap has similarly good documentation, and they got some slightly different components that you can use, like carousel, which I think Material UI has something like this as well. But there's several other libraries that exist that you're free to use. There's a really cool one whose name is escaping me that I learned about like a few months ago. I think it looks really cool. Their docs aren't as good, but you can kind of figure it out from just kind of going into their actual code and looking up, the text field props. What I'm doing right now on a Mac, I'm selecting Command. On a Windows, you would do Control, and you can just click into stuff, and eventually you'll end up where its declaration is. I'm right now inside the package. So you can see in here like what fields are available to you. And it may not be super obvious what they do, but you'll know they're there, and then you can play with them to see what they do in the page. But again, you got this documentation, but if I can remember the name of this component library that doesn't have as good docs, but it looks really good, that's how you would find out how to work it. But yeah, we are now at 6:30. Last call for any questions. All right, so next week, I want to get into class components. Go ahead and save this somewhere. We're not going to touch this until a little bit later, but we'll use this that we built today to build on top of when we start playing with APIs, hook up the Pokemon API ultimately to this UI that we built. Next week, we're going to start yet another new React project. So we can play around with class components. And the purpose of that, again, it's archaic. No one does it anymore, but it's to show you everything that's going on under the hood with the hooks that we're going to get into. Hopefully by doing that, you'll have a better understanding of how they work, because knowing how it works under the hood is kind of important. So you could use it correctly, and you're better able to debug stuff when things go sideways. Like use effect, it's easy to screw that up. And if you see a thing is happening on page and you don't know why, hopefully experience with class components is going to kind of, guide your debugging process. Yeah, so if there aren't any other questions, we'll see you next week.